24th pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Terrion Arnold, defensive back, Alabama.
Welcome to the Twentyman Huddle podcast presented by Microsoft. It is draft week, and I'm so happy to welcome in Brian Hudspeth, the Director of College Scouting for the Detroit Lions. And Brian, before we start to look forward, because that's what your job is, right? You're constantly looking at the next class, the next prospect, everything else. But have you given yourself and have you guys down there given yourself any time to just step back and kind of pat yourself on the back a little bit for the last 4 years? I mean, you look at some of this class. I mean, you guys have drafted 6 Pro Bowlers and an All-Pro in the last 4 seasons. It's now become the core of your football team. I know you're always looking forward, but have you had a chance to just look back at all and recognize what you guys have accomplished over the last 4 years?
Well, appreciate that compliment. It's nice to always, look back at the class and look back at the players that have been selected and how much they've been able to contribute for our team, especially immediately. So we get a lot of compliments, and so it's always nice to hear. But it's got to find the next guy now. Got to just keep adding to the pieces that we have and continue just to add talent and stack good drafts on top of good drafts. And I think that we're well on our way again this year to doing that.
What is this week like for you? You're a week out from the actual draft day. Is the board pretty much set? Is there excitement? Is there a little bit of anxiety? Do you feel like your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed? There's not much to do here, I guess. What's this final week of preparation like?
It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of excitement, a little bit of anxiety. You're always trying to tie up the loose ends right now, and quote unquote, the hay is never really in the barn. You feel like there's always one more thing you can do, but we're close. We're close to the end and close to the end of this cycle, and we feel good about where we are. We feel good about where we are with the board. So we'll just continue to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and look forward to next week.
Some teams have different strategies with the 30 visits. I know, the Rams out there, they don't do them. Some of their teams maybe don't use all 30. I'm just curious, how valuable, in your opinion, are those visits? You guys obviously talk to these guys throughout the entire year. Your scouts and your department do. They have a pretty good profile of them. You talk to them again at the Combine, have that little 15-minute window. But how important to you guys, at least, are those 30 pre-draft visits, getting to spend really quality time with those guys in your building, in your environment, and how you guys prepare?
Well, you just answered the question. It's invaluable time you can meet with them at your own pace. You can meet with them, in your own environment. You can drill down on maybe something they said or maybe a question or two that maybe arose from some other part of the process, whether it's the Senior Bowl interview or the Combine interview or whatever, and you get them in your building and you kind of just put them through the car wash again and let them meet with every person and every support staff member and coach, scouts, everything, and kind of go through the process again. And so it just gives you a comfortability with the player and allows you to really, kind of just get to know each other and just envision them in your culture as well as them envision being in this building.
And it's really the whole spectrum of the draft. I mean, you guys have had top guys that are expected to be first-round guys, middle-round guys, and even how important, too, is getting kind of on the ground floor some of those guys that might be undrafted free agents and knowing their story, knowing what they're like before you get on that phone afterward. And having that relationship can sometimes mean the difference, can it, in a guy signing here. And we've seen in past years, some of those guys have made impacts on this team.
Yeah, so my background, going all the way back into my history, is I started in college recruiting. So I've been on that side of it where the players got to pick you. Obviously, it's much better for us in the 7 rounds of the draft to pick the players, but you do get into that situation after the draft. There's still maybe a couple of guys out there that you really, really want and fit our culture and fit what we do. So you're always trying to target those guys as well. You try to use those visits strategically. For, like you said, for maybe guys that are going in the first round, maybe it's guys that you envision more as like priority free agent guys. But we do try to use those visits appropriately. But it's good to see those guys in the same light as the first round guys. Get them in the building. They go through the process. They envision being here. You envision them being in this building. And you hope that you've built a strong enough relationship that you can use that recruiting piece at the end.
You've been in the NFL for 24 years. You've been with the Lions 7 years. You spent time in Atlanta, Houston, Tampa Bay before Detroit. I'm just curious, what's it like working with GM Brad Holmes? Because I ask people this who have been in other places too, and a smile comes to their face, just like a smile just came to yours. You've been in a lot of different spots. You've seen a lot of different processes. Maybe how is Brad's a little bit different? What's it like working with Brad? To me, from the outside, he seems like a guy that just kind of maybe gives everybody an opinion and a voice, and that might be a little bit different.
That you hit the nail on the head. Being in those places I've been through a lot of general managers. Unfortunately, I've been through I think Brad maybe it's my 9th GM in the 24 years and all those stops. But the process with Brad and how he manages us is everybody has a little piece of ownership of the entire process, and he allows you to. You can be creative. You can do it how you want to do it. His lens, obviously, is college scouting. He sat in my chair before as a college scouting director, but he allows me to do my job and allows me to have ownership in how I want to manage the guys and how some of the processes. And even though it's his system, he still gives me some creativity and some autonomy to do that. But I would say probably the biggest difference in how we do it here versus some other places I've been is the thoroughness of the whole thing. Like the way we break it down and kind of deconstruct it into small little individual pieces. And like you said, different voices and different areas of the organization have their piece of it, whether it's the coaches or the scouts or the docs or our player development people. Everybody has their individual piece of it, and you have ownership in that, and so your voice comes through and how thorough you are with your piece of the puzzle.
It's probably not surprising to you then that it's led to 6 Pro Bowl players and an All-Pro when you go down and let everybody have a piece of it, and you really break it down the way you guys do. Is it a unique process from where you've been around the league?
Only unique in the sense that because it is so deconstructed. Other places I've been, we were thorough, but we were thorough with everybody being involved to the very end. I'm not, we don't necessarily have everybody involved in every single aspect of it to the very end, but the pieces that people are responsible for, they have ownership of those, and those things, they do them well.
You've been an area scout, you've been a national scout, you've been an assistant director of college scouting. What do you like most about this current director of college scouting role?
It's interesting. I probably went 22 years of my career just managing myself, managing my workflow, managing my process, managing just my workload.
Yeah.
And I immediately, when I get the job from assistant director to director, now I'm managing 12 people across 4 different time zones from Seattle, Washington to Jacksonville, Florida. So that's a challenge in it itself, but I do enjoy that piece of it because I am a people person and I enjoy being around people. And so just having influence on others and making sure that our processes, especially for my part of the the process in college scouting, just making sure all those are tight and everybody's moving in the same direction at the same time and the same pace. And so that part's been really cool about it.
Seems like you're having a fun time in this role and in this building and under this leadership. It seems like it fits you perfect.
Right, it does.
Just how much are you still on the road? Do you, I guess, what is your role when you get to that director role? Now you're dealing with the scouts and managing this house. Do you still like to get on the road a little bit? Do you still try to? Can you?
Yeah.
Does that scout in you still want to see some of these guys live? I guess take me through what's a typical week for you during the NFL season, and then maybe as soon as it gets to the off season, kind of where do you transition?
Well, during the season, obviously, I live remotely. I live in Nashville, so I don't live here in Detroit. But during the season, I've had to tweak, again, going back to I managed myself for a long time, but now I'm managing others and myself. I had to kind of tweak how I go about it. I still try to get on the road at least 3 days a week, 4 if I'm lucky. But, usually Mondays and Fridays are more reserved for administrative things, coming out of a game weekend, getting prepared for the next week. Scouts have reports that are due weekly. So, obviously that work has to be checked, and just kind of, I use Monday and Fridays as kind of workflow days, making sure all the processes are moving correctly. And then, try to get on the road Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, try to go to some live games on the weekend as I still can. Obviously living in Nashville, Vanderbilt is right there in town. So I'm able to see a lot of SEC teams come to my city versus me having to go to some of the other places. So that's been convenient also. But I still just try to go where the players are, where the best players are, and where you can see multiple players, that we have multiple grades on, and where some of the big schools. So you still try to get to those as I can. I spend a lot of time on airplane in the fall, that's for sure. So traveling coast to coast, but I try to manage my time appropriately and not try to overextend myself. And it's funny that you asked that question, because Brad told me from the very beginning when I got the job, he said, I know you're going to try to go to every school in the country. He's like, but you can't do that, you know, just because you just physically can't get there. And so there's a lot of limitations with that.
What's the difference in your mind of watching a guy live versus watching a guy on tape? How much more do you glean or enjoy watching it live versus the cut-ups and everything else you get? And you can see everything there, but do you look for things that maybe you can't see on the tape when you're there live? And what's maybe one or two of those things?
Absolutely. You know, there's no substitute for the live exposure, but there's no substitute for the game film either.
Yeah.
So the best things to see on a live exposure is, number one, is you see a guy physically in his pads. You know, how does he carry his pads? What's his body type? That sort of thing. That's one thing that you get from live exposure, whether that's at practice or whether that's at a game. But things you see at a game that you can't see on tape, especially when you watch quarterbacks play. So I always encourage our guys to watch quarterbacks play on the road if you can, because you see them in other environments. You see when things go bad, how do they interact with their teammates on the sideline? What do they do when they come off the sideline after an interception or make a mistake or a stalled drive? You know, so just seeing how those guys interact with their teammates. Do they get on the phone and talk to the coordinator? Do they throw their helmet? Do they, you know, what's the body language? How do they approach pregame? So you see a lot of that stuff too. Are they dialed in during pregame? Or are they not dialed in and, you know, kind of lackadaisical? So it's good to see those types of interactions, and you don't get that on film, obviously.
I thought this would be a great question for you, because you've been around scouting and you've been around college ball for so long. How has NIL changed? And I know this is going to be a good answer from that response, but you know, you've been in it now enough that, you know, maybe guys are in 3 different programs. Does that help because you're throwing 3 different schemes? Yeah. Are guys maybe not as ready for the NFL because they're not in one place and you know, building through a program and stuff like that? I'm just curious, how in your opinion has NIL maybe changed the scouting world a little bit?
Well, are you asking me that question because I'm a Tennessee guy and you're asking me about NIL?
No, I'm just
kind of a timely question.
Yes, it is a timely question.
Well, twofold. Number one of the questions we always used to ask when we went through schools is, you know, how's this kid going to be when he gets money? You know, who's going to be in his support group? Who's going to be in his circle? Who is he going to have to take care of? Who's he bringing with him? How do you think he is going to handle no money to now millions of dollars in his pocket?
Yeah.
Well, that question now is answered.
Yeah.
You know, so we kind of now have a little bit of an insight into who's in their inner circle, who helps them make financial decisions, how do they manage money, how do they manage themselves in these real world situations now that they were previously not always vetted and tested against. Now
or it wasn't public knowledge.
Or exactly, or it was under the table anyway. So, but now we just know, you know, kind of how that's going to manifest itself and play itself out. Which that piece has been good. The downside of NIL for us is the NIL entices these kids to stay in school now, so that there's a lot less depth in the draft because you generally at the peak of underclassmen coming out, you had about 120 to 130 players. Now it's down to 55 to 70. Wow. So you've lost essentially almost 2 rounds of players in some regards. Now, that's making the assumption that they were all going to be in the, you know, top rounds, but right. And they generally were though. But you've kind of lost some depth. So that the NIL world has changed us a little bit that way, and so that has been one kind of downside of it, you know. The one thing about going back to your question about like guys bouncing around, it does hurt some positions. You know, you have a quarterback who's been in 3 different systems in 3 years. You know, you have guys that have never solidified themselves on a depth chart, so you're constantly wondering, you know, what happened at the previous place. It causes us to have to do a lot more research and a lot more vetting of the multiple stops before, and the story can always change. So you have to find those relationships that you really lean on, and that's where the area scouts really are invaluable, is that the relationships they built over time at all these different places, to where you can pick up the phone and call the guy at a previous stop and like, hey, what's the real story here? Like this school's telling me this, you guys told me that. Like, we're so trying to find the you know, middle ground somewhere of what maybe the true story is about why they all the different changes. So
made your job a little harder.
Right.
Well, obviously we're not going to go through your board or, you know, who you guys like, don't like, what positions or whatever. But I guess maybe let's finish on this one. When you look at the 2025 NFL draft, what's maybe just a riding observation? What maybe, how would you describe this draft that you guys are heading into now in a few days?
You know, the thing that probably jumps out the most is, you know, a lot of drafts you can kind of peg the first 5 to 10 picks right out of the gate. you know that these are the 10 guys that are going to go in the top 10. I don't know that you can say that in this draft, because I think this is going to come down to need. It's going to come down to a lot of guys where their depth charts are, whatever their draft strategy may be, how free agency went for them. So I think in this draft you're just going to see, you're not going to be able to predict maybe past 5. I don't even know if you could predict the top 5 at this point.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's what it truly is when Brad Holmes in his press conference last week said, grab your popcorn and just watch. It's a grab your popcorn and enjoy it kind of draft, isn't it?
It is.
Well, I know you've been busy doing your work for the last, year, maybe over a year on these guys. It all comes to a head Thursday night in Green Bay. Thanks so much for taking the time here. Great insight and good luck to you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Welcome back to the Twentyman Huddle podcast. I am now joined by Daniel Jeremiah. He is one of the best in the business for the NFL Network, an analyst there, and he'll be part of that NFL coverage of the NFL draft in Green Bay, the 24th to 26th. DJ, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you. Can you give me a somewhat area weather report here? What are we looking like in that realm of the country for this?
Okay, so we're a little cold today. We might get to 50 today, but it's going to warm up in the weekend. We got 60s and 70s coming in. I heard it's going to be pretty good in Green Bay next week. They might get into the 60s in there, so it should be good. You're not going to freeze in the Midwest.
I'm not bringing my golf clubs by any chance, but I am. I might have to bring my overcoat, so that's a win.
I think you might be a little bit busy for that. They keep you pretty busy for those 3 days. Well, let's get right into it, Deej. I mean, I guess when you look at this class overall, what maybe jumps out to you? How would you classify this class? What would be the big description of it?
Yeah, for me, I've kind of used the theme of this draft class as starters, not stars. Like we don't necessarily have that, that sexy list of guys up there at the top of the draft that maybe we've had in other years. We've got a couple marquee players, and that's Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter in whatever order you want to put them. There's one, to me, one true, first round quarterback in just about any draft at some point in time, and that would be Cam Ward. And then after that, man, it's just a bunch of guys that are going to be, steady Eddie, solid contributors and starters with a good group of defensive linemen kind of headlining that class.
That obviously with Detroit, that's one of those kind of needs there along the defensive line, edge and defensive tackle. When you look at Brad Holmes, obviously he doesn't draft for need. He takes best available, and look what that's done over the last 4 years. But when you do look at some of their needs, defensive line, interior offensive line, they could use, maybe some safety depth, some wide receiver depth. Where you mentioned the defensive line, some of those other areas, interior offensive line, maybe receiver, safety, are those areas where you're going to be able to find some guys maybe well into day 2 too?
Well, I think receiver-wise, I don't love the first batch of receivers, like the first-round guys. There's just a few of them. There's a handful. I kind of like that second-day group. I think there is some depth there in the second and third round. A couple kids from Iowa State jump out to the front of my mind on that list with Knoll and Higgins. But, that's solid. Interior offensive line, it's not, again, you've got a couple guys who are going to go in the first round. I think we could have 3. In fact, I think Donovan Jackson would make some sense for Detroit. I think he would be there out of Ohio State. I don't love the middle tier interior offensive line class. Though I wouldn't necessarily say those are strengths, but to me, like defensive tackles, yes, you can find defensive tackles all throughout this draft. Edge rushers, yes, like those are positions that I think you'll be happy. Third, fourth round, you're going to see good players there.
I'm curious, just your outside opinion of Detroit and Brad Holmes and the job that he's done over the last 4 years. I mean, DJ, look at the drafts and what's become their core. Penei Sewell, St. Brown, Aleem McNeil, Hutch, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kirby Joseph, LaPorta Branch. I mean, we can continue going on and on and on and on. They just seem to hit every year. And now those guys have become the core. It's changed a little bit because now some contracts are going to be due. You when you draft well, that's the consequence, right? Now you've got to pay these guys. It's a good problem to have. But I'm just curious, what have you thought about Brad Holmes? What's the perspective of him outside of just the job he's done over the last 4 years in the draft?
Well, I'm a big fan of his, and I think we met for the first time this year. Was the first time that we had maybe had seen each other in passing, but we were at a game and we had a chance to catch up on the sideline for about 20 minutes. And I've always had respect for him, even before he got to Detroit, and his reputation was solid and strong. But getting a chance to meet with him, I felt like, okay, I kind of get it now. I understand what it is because he's such a he's such a good communicator, and he's a listener, and he's an observer. I mean, just out at the sideline, we're talking about guys that we're looking at that were getting ready to play in this ball game. And it kind of hit me, and I think this is true with a lot of the best general managers. They understand people as well as they understand players. And those names that you just rattled off, if you were to kind of weave a thread between all of them, they're all ultra competitive guys. Like they love ball, they're all in, they fit the culture that they've established there with Coach Campbell. So to me, I think sometimes the player evaluation is not that difficult, but it's the personal evaluation that can get people in trouble. And I think he's just done a wonderful job of finding guys. And I mean, Branch, all the stories I heard about him coming out, how dedicated he was, how passionate he was. Hutch, had his folklore there at Michigan. You go all the way through all those guys. They all love football, and he's done a great job of finding talented guys that fit their culture.
You've got a background, in personnel departments and in front offices, and you kind of know when you've had that draft success and you've had some history, and now some bills are coming due. How important now is this process? How important is this year, next year, the following year? Because now you're paying a lot of these guys. Your salary cap is going to be, you're going to have to be very measured with it the next few years. Just now, how important is the draft the next couple years for Detroit to get some of those contributors on rookie contracts that you can kind of supplement with some of the big time deals you're going to have on this roster as well?
Well, I think of the teams that have had the prolonged success, teams that have just been good for a long time. And I'm a little bit biased because of where I grew up in this business, but I just look at the Baltimore Ravens as kind of a great example for an organization like Detroit, where, man, you draft when you draft really well, and then you back that up by continuing to draft well. It's just like this cycle. What happens then? Okay, we sign some guys, we let some guys walk. The guys that walk, we end up getting comp picks. So now I've got extra picks, extra ammunition. You keep drafting well, you can then let more players walk. More players walk, you get more comp picks. The Philadelphia Eagles have done the exact same thing. I just realized today, I think Philadelphia has 12 picks next year. Wow. They just won the Super Bowl. And so they signed some of their core guys. They let some guys go out in free agency and got a lot of money. And then they're going to get extra picks. And if they keep draft, it's just like this wheel that just gets spinning once you kind of get that rolling. And Detroit's like, they're close to getting that flywheel really, really rolling there.
You mentioned Donovan Jackson, some other guys there. When you've done the mock drafts and you've gone through it now, you're getting to your final ones here. Just who's a guy that you keep looking at 28 and you're like, man, he just kind of fits Detroit. He would be a good selection there. Maybe if there's a couple guys that you've gone back and forth on that you seem just like are really good fits, fit Brad Holmes, fit Detroit, and what they do there.
Yeah, I mean, that would be one of them. Donovan Jackson, Gray Zabel, if he were to get there. I don't think he'll, get that far from North Dakota State. Those two offensive linemen, to me, would be great fits. I look on the defensive side of the ball. I always just kind of look at the guys, and even bringing in Davenport, like having him there, like they just kind of have a type. They're rough and they're rugged. So, Shamar Stewart, who doesn't have the production, but kind of fits that explosive, physical, rough, rugged style. On the outside. To me, a guy like Walter Nolan on the inside is someone who's just really, really twitched up and explosive, and who could really move up and down the line of scrimmage if you wanted him to. So those are some of the names that just kind of pop into my head when you think about guys who kind of fit the way they play.
We've talked about the defensive line class a little bit. Is this how far back do you have to go to get a class that's maybe as talented and as deep, both along the interior, on the edge, as this year's class? Are teams looking for defensive line help? Are they going to be able to find it well into day two?
I think you can get into the middle of the second round. To me, I think you need to probably handle your business there in the first 45 to 50 picks, and then I think there's kind of a little bit of a drop off there. But to me, I think a sweet spot is that early second round. I think that is a nice little window there, and we'll see guys like Nick Scorton going to go back into one or early two. JT Tuamalo from Ohio State's going to probably go in that range. He's a good football player, solid. You know exactly what you're getting. Landon Jackson, who I've kind of joked that, man, if Detroit were to trade back, I don't think you do it in the first round, but if they were to trade back, that's someone who kind of fits them out of Arkansas to the point where if you just saw the silhouettes, not comparing them as players, but the silhouettes of Aiden Hutchinson and Landon Jackson, they look identical, like just like their body type and how they're built, and obviously plays really, really hard. So I think that's kind of a sweet spot. I think that, I haven't heard this on Detroit side of things. I've talked to other teams picking in that range, and there's teams that are, on the back of one, hoping that somehow there's quarterbacks there and somehow somebody wants to come up, because there's more than a few teams willing to get the heck out of there.
Since you bring it up, just how crazy is one draft year to the other when you talk about just the quarterback position? And last year there were 6, 7 guys taken in the first. Didn't the first defensive guy didn't go to like 15 or 16, something like that? So it was really crazy. And then this year you're like, there's a discussion are 2 guys even have first round grades? It's crazy how that goes. How does that position in particular really just change up this year's draft versus what we saw from last year?
I was talking to a team that picks in the early portion of the 20s, and it was kind of funny. They were like, look, I want all the quarterbacks to go before we pick to push somebody down, or I want only one of them to go so that I'm getting calls on the clock when we're on there. He said, I just don't want to have like 2, don't split the baby. I don't want to have like 2 go, and then I kind of, I don't really get the benefit of that whole thing. So quarterbacks drive movement, and movement is, to be honest with you, especially on the TV side of things, is kind of what makes it fun.
Yeah, it's also fun too. There's always those few guys that you kind of watch and you're like, boy, it'll be really interesting where he goes. Shedeur Sanders obviously is one. For me, Ashton Jeanty is another guy. Will he go? Will the Raiders pull the trigger? Does he get to Chicago being in the NFC North? You certainly don't want to see that guy with Ben Johnson, the creativity and the weapons they have there. Is there a guy for you that you're like, boy, I really can't wait to kind of see where he goes and how that might change up the early part of the draft?
100%. Like, to me, those are great examples, especially with Ashton Jeanty. I would say Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren, just such a fun player for me. I would say there's a little maybe prospect fatigue with him, like coming late into the process. I think he's just kind of been up there the whole time, and then now it's like there's some nitpicking that's going on with him. But I just think he's such a physical, and I'll use this word for the 10th time in our conversation, he's just a rugged dude, man. I'm all about guys who kind of have that grimy, rugged play style, and that's what he is. And he can use him. You can move him around, do different things with him. He's, most tight ends as they come into the NFL these days are very popular in the quarterback room, not so popular in the running back room. He's going to be well-liked in both of those rooms because he can actually block somebody.
DJ, you can never say that word enough on a Detroit Lions pod. You're talking about the grit capital of the world right here. So those are the guys that fit here in the Midwest and certainly the NFC North. But talking about the NFC North, what is there a team that jumps out? Maybe we'll be really interested to see what they do. Depending what they do, can maybe take a jump, can compete with Detroit, can challenge Detroit. Green Bay's obviously young. Chicago's young. There's some new coaches in the division. Is there one team from the NFC North you're kind of interested in seeing how it shakes out?
Well, I feel like Minnesota opened all their presents before Christmas, so like they don't have any picks. So I don't know how much better they're going to get from now. I mean, they were aggressive in free agency. But I don't know what, their team is pretty much what it is. It's pretty set right now. So in terms of the teams that over the next week you could see kind of close the gap with Detroit, I mean, I'm still looking at Chicago. I am. Green Bay's not going anywhere. They're going to be really solid, going to be really good. But I think in terms of the growth potential, I still think Chicago. And look, I'm excited to see what Ben Johnson does there. I'm excited to see how he morphs that offense around Caleb Williams. And they've got a chance in with their draft capital coming up to kind of put the finishing touches on what should be a better offense.
Well, DJ, great stuff as always. I know you are going to be a busy man this week, next week. Thank you so much for taking the time. Detroit Lions fans love it. They'll be following you on the NFL Network all 3 days in Green Bay. And thanks so much for joining the podcast. Appreciate you as always.
Well, I appreciate you. And look, Green Bay's got a high standard to live up to because Detroit knocked it out of the park. So I'm looking forward to getting out there and having another great week.